If I had scraped the ice that night, like my husband demanded, I would not be alive to tell this story. At the time, nothing about that day felt important enough to change my life. It was late afternoon in Detroit, the kind of winter day where the sky never fully brightens, and the cold seems to seep straight into your bones. The wind pushed hard against the glass doors of the small neighborhood grocery store on Gratiot Avenue, rattling them every time someone came in or out. Snow had already turned to ice on the sidewalks, and people moved quickly, heads down, eager to get home. I was standing in line with a handbasket resting against my knee, my shoulders aching from a long shift at the clinic. I worked as a medical billing clerk. Nothing glamorous, just hours of codes and corrections, insurance calls, and quiet frustration. At 57, life had settled into a narrow routine. Work, home, dinner, silence. I no longer expected surprises. Ahead of me at the register stood a very small elderly woman, hunched as if the weight of the winter pressed directly on her back. She wore a thin brown coat that had clearly seen many winters before this one, and a knitted hat pulled down low over wisps of white hair. Her hands shook as she emptied the contents of a cracked vinyl wallet onto the counter. Loose coins scattered across the surface. Pennies, nickels, a few dimes. On the conveyor belt lay only the basics: a loaf of store-brand bread, a carton of milk, 2 cans of soup, 1 small bag of rice. The cashier glanced at the screen, then at the woman. I recognized that look, tired but careful. "You're short $1.18, she said gently. The woman frowned, confusion washing over her face. She gathered the coins again, counted them once, then twice, lips moving silently. "That can't be right," she whispered. "I counted at home. I was sure I had enough." Someone behind me sighed loudly. Another shifted impatiently. I don't know why, but something tightened in my chest. Maybe it was the way the woman's fingers trembled from the cold. Maybe it was how familiar that look of quiet embarrassment felt. I had worn it myself more times than I cared to remember. Before I could overthink it, I stepped forward. "I've got it," I said, placing a 20 on the counter. "Please just add it to mine." The woman turned slowly, eyes lifting to meet mine. For a moment, I forgot the noise of the store, the wind, the line behind us. Her eyes were sharp, clear, far too alert for someone who looked so fragile. It felt as if she were looking through me rather than at me. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "but I want to." She nodded once, then gathered her groceries into a worn cloth bag. When she took the bag from the counter, her hand brushed mine. Her skin was cold, too cold. "Kindness doesn't disappear," she said quietly. "It circles back." I smiled politely, paid for my own groceries, and turned to leave. I was already halfway toward the door when I felt her fingers close around my sleeve. Not weak, firm. She leaned in close enough that I could smell something earthy and sharp, like dried herbs and old paper. "When the ice appears outside your house tonight," she whispered, her voice low and steady, "do not touch it, not even a little." I stared at her, confused. "Leave it exactly as it is," she continued. "Promise me." I laughed softly, awkwardly, unsure what else to do. "Okay," I said, more out of discomfort than belief. "I promise." Only then did she let go. By the time I pushed through the glass doors into the bitter Detroit wind, she was already gone. By the time I reached my car, the wind had sharpened into something almost personal. Ice coated the windshield in uneven patches, and my breath fogged the glass as I sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, replaying the woman's words in my head. "Do not touch the ice." I shook my head and turned the key. People said strange things all the time, especially people who had lived long enough to see patterns where others saw coincidence. I told myself that was all it was. A harmless warning. A superstition. The drive home took less than 10 minutes, but the streets were already slick. The city muted under a thin, dangerous glaze. Detroit winters had a way of making everything feel heavier. Buildings, thoughts, marriages. Our house sat on a quiet block on the east side, a narrow brick place with a shallow front yard and a chain-link fence that had seen better days. The porch light was on, casting a pale yellow circle over the front steps. Ice glistened on the walkway, smooth and glassy. Richard's car was already in the driveway. I carried the groceries inside, my shoulders tense before I even opened the door. The house smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil, the familiar mix that clung to Richard no matter how many times I washed his clothes. He was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I came in. "You're late," he said. "There was ice everywhere," I replied, setting the bags down. Traffic was slow. He hummed in response, a sound that wasn't agreement or disagreement, just noise filling space. Richard Carter had perfected that sound over the years. He was 60 now, tall and still broad-shouldered, though his hair had thinned and gone gray at the temples. He worked as a logistics supervisor at a distribution warehouse near the river. Long hours. Constant stress. Or at least, that was what he said. I unpacked the groceries while he watched his screen. Bread in the cabinet. Milk in the fridge. The simple rhythm of it steadied me. "I'm heading out tonight," he said suddenly. I paused. "Tonight?" "Yeah, overnight run issue. They need me on site early tomorrow." He finally looked up at me then, his eyes flat. "Make sure you scrape the ice before you go to bed. I don't want to deal with that mess in the morning." There it was, the instruction. Not a request, never a question. My first instinct was to nod, to agree automatically the way I had for decades. That was how our marriage worked now. He spoke, I adjusted. But the words from the grocery store rose up, uninvited and sharp. "When the ice appears outside your house tonight, do not touch it." "I might wait until morning," I said carefully. "It's supposed to get colder overnight. Scraping now might not help much." Richard's jaw tightened. "I said tonight," he replied. "It'll only take you 15 minutes. You're home anyway." Home anyway. I felt something shift inside me. A small thing. Quiet, but solid. "I've had a long day," I said, "and my knee's been acting up again." He exhaled through his nose, irritated. "You always have something." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. We had been living inside silences like this for years, stepping around them, pretending they weren't walls. Richard grabbed his jacket and keys. "I'll be gone by 8, he said. "Don't forget." He walked past me without another word, his shoulder brushing mine as he headed for the stairs. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the back door, at the faint reflection of ice shining outside. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't sure I was going to do what my husband told me to do. Richard left just before 8, the door closing behind him with a dull, final sound that echoed through the house. I watched from the living room window as his car backed out of the driveway, tires crunching over the thin layer of ice I had not touched. His taillights disappeared at the end of the block, swallowed by the gray-blue darkness of early winter evening. The house felt larger the moment he was gone, too quiet. Every sound seemed to stretch. I locked the door, then checked it again, twisting the deadbolt until it clicked firmly into place. I told myself I was being cautious, nothing more. Detroit winters had a way of making people jumpy. Outside, the temperature dropped fast. Ice thickened across the porch steps and along the walkway, turning the ground into a smooth, dangerous sheet that reflected the porch light like dull glass. I stood there for a long moment, coat still on, shovel resting against the wall where Richard had leaned it earlier. All I had to do was pick it up. 15 minutes, he had said. I thought of the old woman's grip on my sleeve, the weight in her voice, not even a little. I turned away and shut the door. Inside, I moved through the house with restless energy. I turned on extra lamps, filling the rooms with warm light that pushed back the shadows. I pulled the curtains closed, one by one, then hesitated at the window facing the backyard. The fence line was barely visible now, the alley beyond it completely swallowed by darkness. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the shed. Somewhere in the distance, metal clanged, sharp and hollow, then went silent again. I told myself it was nothing, a loose gate, a trash can tipping over. I heated soup, but barely tasted it. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a dull pressure in my chest that refused to go away. I checked my phone. No messages. The signal flickered, then dropped to 1 bar. Around 10, the lights dimmed for a split second, then steadied. My heart jumped anyway. I locked the back door, then the bedroom door. I felt foolish doing it, but I did it all the same. When I finally went upstairs, I changed into my night clothes and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The house creaked as it settled, old wood responding to the cold. Somewhere beneath those familiar sounds, I thought I heard something else. A scrape. I froze. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate. I crossed the room and peered through the narrow gap in the curtain. The yard lay still, coated in ice that glimmered faintly under the moonlight. Nothing moved. I exhaled, my breath fogging the glass. I was letting my imagination run away with me. That was all. Sleep came in fragments. I drifted off only to wake again at the slightest noise. At some point, I dreamed of the woman from the store. She stood at the edge of my yard, her figure blurred by frost, her eyes sharp as ever. "The ice remembers," she said calmly. "People forget, but the ice never does." I woke with a start, my heart pounding, the house silent around me. I checked the clock. Just after 3. For a long time, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come. Morning came quietly, the way it often does after a storm, as if the night had spent all its violence and left nothing behind but stillness. I woke to a pale gray light pressing against the bedroom curtains and an unfamiliar silence. No wind, no distant traffic, just the slow, steady sound of my own breathing. For a moment, I forgot about the ice, about the warning, about the unease that had followed me through the night. Then I sat up. The house felt too calm, like a held breath. I pulled on a thick sweater and wrapped my robe around myself before heading downstairs. The floor was cold under my feet, the kind of cold that seeps upward, reminding you it is winter whether you like it or not. I made coffee out of habit, the machine gurgling softly in the quiet kitchen. As it brewed, I walked to the front window. I stopped. The yard was covered in a flawless sheet of ice, smooth and unbroken, stretching from the porch steps to the fence line. It caught the weak morning light and reflected it back, silver and glassy, almost beautiful in its stillness. Almost, because cutting through that perfect surface was a trail of footprints. Large ones. They began at the side gate, pressed deep and wide into the ice, each step deliberate and heavy. They moved straight toward the house, stopping just short of the porch. Then they turned. My stomach dropped. The prints circled the house slowly, methodically, tracing the outline of the walls. They paused beneath the living room window, then the kitchen. Then they moved along the side of the house toward the back, where the bedroom windows faced the yard. I pressed my hand to the glass, my fingers trembling. The footprint stopped directly below my bedroom window. I could almost see it, someone standing there in the dark, looking up, watching. The coffee maker beeped behind me, loud in the silence. I flinched hard enough that my shoulder brushed the cabinet. My heart was racing now, pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I leaned closer to the window, forcing myself to look more carefully. The ice was intact everywhere except where those boots had passed. The tread marks were deep, unmistakable. Not Richard's. I knew his stride, his shoes. These were larger, heavier. Whoever it was had come in the night while I slept. And then I understood. If I had scraped the ice, like Richard told me to, there would be nothing to see now. No trail, no proof. Just bare concrete and a sick feeling I could never explain. I stepped back, my legs unsteady, and grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from sitting down on the floor. My mind raced, trying to fill in gaps, to make sense of what I was seeing. No broken windows, no forced doors, nothing stolen. Just footprints, careful ones. I walked from window to window, my movements slow, afraid that if I rushed, something terrible would reveal itself. The back door was locked. The windows were latched. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Except the ice. Except what it had remembered. A cold realization settled over me, heavy and undeniable. Someone had known I was alone. Someone had taken the time to come here, to walk around my house in the dark, to study it, to study me. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and knew, with sudden clarity, that this was no longer something I could face by myself. My fingers shook so badly I had to dial the number twice. I stood in the kitchen, with my back pressed against the counter, eyes locked on the window, afraid that if I looked away for even a second, something would change, that the footprints would vanish. Or worse, that someone would be standing there again. When the line finally connected, I forced myself to speak clearly. "My name is Elaine Carter," I said. "I live on Eastdale Street. Someone was in my yard last night." The dispatcher asked the usual questions. Was anyone hurt? Was there a break-in? Was I alone? I answered each one carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. "No," I said. "Nothing was taken, but there are footprints in the ice. They go all the way around my house." There was a brief pause on the other end. "All right, ma'am. An officer will be dispatched. Please stay inside and do not disturb the area." I hung up and locked my phone screen, my reflection staring back at me, pale and wide-eyed. I wrapped my arms around myself and waited. It took 20 minutes for the patrol car to arrive. I watched from behind the curtain as it pulled up, tires crunching carefully over the icy street. A tall man stepped out, his breath visible in the cold air. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had seen too much to panic over little things. He knocked once, firmly. "Police," he called. I opened the door just enough to see him clearly before unchaining it. He offered a brief nod. "Officer Marcus Holloway," he said. "You're Elaine Carter?" "Yes." He stepped inside, stamping the ice from his boots. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the room without lingering. "Why don't you show me what you saw?" We walked onto the porch together. The cold hit my lungs sharply, but I barely noticed. Officer Holloway crouched near the first set of footprints, studying them closely. "These aren't random," he said after a moment. "Good depth, heavy tread, work boots or safety boots." He followed the trail slowly, circling the house just as the stranger had. His expression grew more serious with every step. "This person wasn't drunk," he continued. "Wasn't in a hurry. He knew exactly where he was going." I swallowed. "Can you tell how tall he was?" Holloway measured the distance between steps with his eyes. At least 6 foot, maybe more. Long stride. I hugged my arms tighter. "My husband left around 8 last night." He looked up at me sharply. "Your husband doesn't wear boots like this?" "No," I said quickly. and his stride is shorter. Holloway nodded, already writing in a small notebook. Did anyone else know you'd be alone? I hesitated. He works in logistics. People know his schedule. Anyone you've had problems with? He asked. Anyone who's made you uncomfortable? I shook my head, though uncertainty crept in despite myself. He stood and scanned the neighboring houses. Any security cameras nearby? Yes, I said. Across the street. Mrs. Nolan installed one last year. Good, he replied. That could tell us a lot. As we headed back inside, he paused at the doorway. Mrs. Carter, he said quietly. Whoever did this wasn't here by accident. My heart sank. This looks like someone checking routines, he continued, seeing who's home and when. I knew then that the ice had done more than preserve footprints. It had stopped something from happening. Mrs. Nolan's camera faced the street, not my yard, but it was enough. We stood in her living room, the three of us close to the screen as the footage rewound. The video was grainy, washed in the pale glow of a street lamp, snow drifting sideways like static. Officer Holloway leaned forward, arms crossed, completely still. There, he said. A figure entered the frame from the left. My breath caught in my throat. The man was tall, broad across the shoulders, his face hidden beneath a hood pulled low. He walked with purpose, not hurried, not cautious. He stopped at my gate and looked directly toward my house. Even through the poor quality, I could feel it. He wasn't guessing. He lifted the latch with ease and stepped into my yard. The timestamp showed just after 11:30. Mrs. Nolan pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh my God. We watched as the man disappeared out of frame, heading toward my house. Several minutes passed before he reappeared, walking back the same way. Before leaving, he stopped again. This time, he turned. He stood there, facing the camera, and tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, unmistakably, he smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Knowing. I felt cold all the way through. Officer Holloway paused the video. I need to ask you something very carefully, he said. Does this man look familiar to you at all? I studied the frozen image. The hood hid most of his face, but something about his build tugged at my memory. I'm not sure, I admitted. Maybe someone I've seen before. Holloway nodded slowly. That makes sense. He explained that the boots matched a type commonly worn at industrial warehouses, heavy duty, slip-resistant, standard issue in certain facilities. Where does your husband work again? He asked. At a distribution center near the river, I replied automatically. And has he ever mentioned problems with coworkers? Holloway continued. Conflicts, firings, accidents. I hesitated. There was someone, I said slowly. A man named Caleb. He was let go last year. Richard said he was unstable, blamed everyone else for his mistakes. Holloway's eyes sharpened. Did your husband stay in contact with him? My stomach tightened. I don't know, I said. Richard doesn't tell me much anymore. That was when the second call came in. Holloway stepped aside to answer his phone. I watched his expression change as he listened. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. When he hung up, he looked at me differently. Mrs. Carter, he said, we pulled additional footage from a traffic camera near your husband's workplace. My pulse thundered in my ears. It shows your husband meeting with a man matching this description 2 nights ago, he continued. They spoke for several minutes. No cameras inside the lot, but the timing lines up. The room seemed to tilt. No, I whispered. That doesn't make sense. Holloway didn't interrupt. Your husband asked you to scrape the ice, he said carefully. Repeatedly. Insisted on it. Yes, I said. My voice sounded far away. And if you had, he continued, there would be no footprints this morning, no evidence anyone had been here. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. He wanted me outside, alone, at night, on ice. A fall would have been easy, believable, tragic. I felt sick. We're looking into your husband's insurance policies now, Holloway said quietly. Specifically, any recent changes. I sank onto the edge of Mrs. Nolan's couch, my legs barely holding me up. Mrs. Carter, he added, this wasn't a random threat. This was planned. My mind raced backward through years of silence, of distance, of cold looks and clipped words. How long had I been a problem to solve, rather than a wife to love? The old woman's voice echoed in my memory, calm and certain. Leave it exactly as it is. The ice hadn't just preserved footprints. It had shattered a lie I'd been living inside for decades. I couldn't stop thinking about her. While Officer Holloway continued his investigation and advised me to stay with a neighbor for a few nights, my thoughts kept circling back to the woman in the grocery store. Her eyes, her voice, the certainty in her warning. It no longer felt strange or mystical. It felt precise, necessary. 2 days later, after giving my formal statement, I asked around. It didn't take long. An older clerk at the same grocery store recognized my description immediately. "Oh, you mean Ruth," she said quietly. "She comes in sometimes. Not as much anymore." "Ruth," I repeated. "She used to live near the old rail yards," the clerk continued. "Lost her husband years back. Slipped on ice outside their house late one night. Died before the ambulance got there." My breath caught. "They said it was an accident," the clerk added. "But she never believed that. Said someone wanted him gone. Said the signs were there if you knew how to look." I left the store with my hands shaking. Through a social worker connected to the assisted living complex nearby, I managed to arrange a visit. They warned me Ruth didn't talk much anymore, that she kept to herself, that she didn't like questions. She was sitting by a window when I arrived, wrapped in a faded shawl, watching snow fall onto a small courtyard below. When she turned and saw me, her eyes sharpened instantly. "You listened," she said. I hadn't even spoken yet. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." She nodded once, as if that was all the confirmation she needed. "They never listen," she said calmly. "That's how it happens." I sat across from her, my heart pounding. "How did you know?" I asked. "About the ice? About that night?" Ruth folded her hands in her lap. "Because control always looks the same," she replied. "Men who want accidents don't push, they arrange." She told me about her husband, about the pressure, the small demands, the insistence that seemed harmless at the time. Go outside. Take care of it now. It won't take long. About the ice he never should have touched. "I see patterns," she said simply. "I hear them in how people talk, in what they ask for, in what they insist on." I felt tears slide down my face before I realized I was crying. "You saved my life," I said. Ruth looked back toward the window. "No," she said softly. "You did. You chose not to obey." We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the snow drift down. Before I left, she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was still strong. "Remember this," she said. "Love doesn't put you in danger. And kindness," she added, meeting my eyes again, "has a way of finding its way back." When I walked out into the cold Detroit air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. And the strength that comes from finally seeing the truth. Richard was arrested 3 days later. The evidence stacked up quickly once the investigation widened. Phone records, deleted messages recovered from his laptop, a recent increase to a life insurance policy I didn't even know existed. Conversations that proved he had been planning, not reacting, calculating, not caring. When Officer Holloway told me, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not grief. Not shock. Just a deep, steady release. Like finally setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing it was crushing me. I didn't cry when they took him away. I watched from the living room window as the patrol car pulled off the street. The same street where he had once promised to protect me, to build a life with me. That promise had expired long before the handcuffs ever clicked shut. In the weeks that followed, I stayed with a neighbor, then with my sister outside the city. I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Not at first. Every creak sounded too loud. Every shadow felt too aware. Eventually, I made a decision I should have made long ago. I sold the house. The realtor told me it had good bones, good light, good potential. I smiled at that. Bones can be strong and still hold pain. Light can be blocked for years before it finds its way in. I moved into a small apartment closer to downtown Detroit. Nothing fancy, just quiet, safe, mine. For the first time in decades, no one told me what to do. No one demanded explanations. No one arranged my life like a series of obstacles I was expected to survive quietly. Sometimes, on cold mornings, I still think about the ice. How something so ordinary, so easily dismissed, became the difference between life and death. How close I came to stepping outside simply because I was told to. Because obedience had once felt easier than resistance. And I think about Ruth, about how kindness traveled in a circle, from me to her, from her back to me, not as money or gratitude, but as a warning given at exactly the right moment. People like to call that fate, or luck, or coincidence. I don't. I call it listening. Listening to the unease you've been taught to ignore. Listening to the voice that tells you something is wrong, even when you can't explain why. Listening when someone speaks from a place of hard-earned truth. The ice remembered what I was about to forget. And because of that, I'm still here. Life lessons from this story. 1. Routine can hide danger when you stop questioning it. 2. Intuition is often experienced speaking quietly. 3. Control, disguised as concern, is still control. 4. Small acts of kindness can return as life-saving warnings. 5. Listening at the right moment can change everything. If this story made you pause, ask yourself one thing. Would you have listened? What lesson did you take from this story? And which city are you watching from? Like, share, and leave a comment below. Your voice might help someone else listen in time.